inspiring, educating, and at times, entertaining. This is the Retirement Years Podcast with your hosts, Mary Ellen French and Dave Wing.
Scary music. Perfect for our topic today. Hi there, I'm Mary Ellen French.
And I'm Dave Wing. And today we're going to talk further about why some people fear retirement. But first, I thought we'd talk about a little bit about our own fears or phobias. And I'll go first.
Okay.
It seems silly, but my number one, if I had to pick one, it's bats.
No.
I don't know why. They're creepy. Pretty much harmless, and they are great for eating insects, and they have their part in the food chain, but they totally freak me out day or night. I can't take it. I can't. I just reduce myself to something I'm not very proud of if there's a bat in the room.
So nobody's going to believe we didn't pre-plan this, but bats are my number one phobia. You can ask anybody in my family. Our last house had bats regularly, and we did some research to see, when we could expect bats, and we thought it was only during, I think it was May to October. Oh no, we had a bat in the house in January.
Ooh.
January.
How did it? I don't know how that would happen.
Well, anyway, there was a chimney and whatever. We had to move because I would sleep at night with towels stuffed under my bedroom door so that no bats could get into my room. And I knew my bedroom was bat-proof except for the crack under the door. My family thought I was insane, but I love bats outside. Well, okay, love's a strong word. I appreciate that bats have a role to play in nature, but not in my house. Ugh.
And you have to remember, and you personally know, that I grew up in a very small village. And therefore, not only did we not have internet, we didn't read much either. And we feared somehow that the bats would get into our hair, a fear that for me personally has less and less for me to worry about. But we thought they would get in our hair and lay eggs.
Eggs?
Yes. And once, many years later when I realized they're mammals,
yes,
that fear was disproportionate to, it was not at all rational. So that was, it is funny that it's both of ours. And of course then there's I won't pick up a snake either or cuddle a spider, but it's bats. A spider could be up on the wall the whole time we're in here. No problem. Not a bat.
No. And that's the thing about fears and phobias, right? Like they're really not rational, which I think is probably the definition of phobia. But yeah, I don't know. I wonder, given that we both don't like bats, that's got to be a common fear, don't you think?
It is. And as always here at the Retirement Years Podcast, we arm ourselves with very well-researched topics and then set each other up to reveal such knowledge. But there are. In January 2021, a random sample of 1,000 adults across the United States were asked about their fears. And then they rank them. And there are more in the rankings, but these are the highlights.
Right.
And number one was public speaking.
Really?
Yeah, and that depends. Like, I would rather public speak than do almost any of the others on here, but that's just me and loving the sound of my voice. But there's also heights, which you and I've discussed. That's sort of a common bond. Blood, snakes, and animals all came in on the same. I don't get how that's one topic, but it would cover a great, and drowning. And of course, that is one very terrible fear.
That's true, yeah.
And then, which of these do you think the respondents reported fearing? Ghosts, zombies, or clowns? Which one ranked highest?
I almost want to say clowns. Stephen King has ruined clowns for me.
Yeah, and they are creepy.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. If you're a clown and listening, that's not fair. You may be a lovely clown.
We apologize.
It was zombies. So
Zombies?
Yes, something that, only one of those actually exists. But zombies rated higher than fears of ghosts or clowns.
Well, I'm not so sure ghosts don't exist, but we don't need to get into that today.
I think that's the role of modern media. that maybe brought zombies up higher because
Yeah.
some thought it was a documentary.
The Walking Dead.
Yes.
Yes, right. I wonder if our fears change over time. Like, I feel like they do. I feel like we become more fearful as we age. Probably because we accumulate experiences we tell ourselves didn't go well when we took a risk. And then when we're faced with the possibility of taking a risk again, we put those past experiences into our future and we tell ourselves that we shouldn't take, quote, unnecessary risks. I was reminiscing recently with my two younger sisters about some of the things that we did when we were in our 20s. I can't share some of them here on our podcast, but for example, one sister moved to Brazil on her own without knowing anyone or knowing the language in her 20s. And my other sister, she signed up with an NGO to assist in Afghanistan's first democratic election in 2004.
Wow.
And she made the decision, and 12 days later, she was in Afghanistan. Yeah. And we were wondering, we were reminiscing, we wonder what our mother thought, right? Because as moms, we are now worrying about our young adult children and the choices that they're making. And the choices that we made in our 20s, like, we wouldn't necessarily do those things now when we're in our 5th and 6th decades.
Yeah, in part because you can't. But
Well, fair.
But I agree 100%. And I think some of it, even for a guy, and I don't pretend to speak on behalf of all guys, but you do learn that certain activities could limit your mortality, your time here.
Yeah.
And you get thinking, no, this could have serious consequences, and therefore, you pass. For example, heights. I used to be able to do it, and now, I watch younger people climb ladders.
Yeah.
I watch our own kids jump off cliffs when we go swimming, and none of those things appeal to me any longer because
No.
I guess I'm overthinking what could happen, but probably a lot of things could happen.
Yeah. Yeah. But we did those things when we were young, right? And I think sometimes as parents, we conveniently forget that when we were young, we did take a lot of risks. But we sure as heck don't want to see our children take those same risks now that they've reached that age. So I was curious to see what the research might say about why we seem to become more fearful as we age.
And what did you find?
So there was a study done by a university in Israel, and I will say it did involve rats. So my apologies to those of you who don't think that animals should be, what's the word I want?
Experimented upon?
Thank you, yes.
Yeah.
So for any of you out there who don't believe that animals should be experimented on, I do apologize. This study does involve the experimentation on younger rats and older rats. Anyway, so the younger rats and the older rats were exposed to a slightly fearful situation. They were put up sort of on a high ledge within the context of the space that they were in. And I'm assuming they were all, wired up. I'm picturing wired up rats.
Right.
And so what the researchers discovered is that there's two things that happen in the brain. First, there's the response to fear. Like we're all pretty familiar, I think, with the whole fight or flight response that happens in the amygdala. So there's that. But then the second brain response has to do with returning the body to normal. And so what happened was that the younger rats were much more able to return to that stable stage and basically extinguish the fear. And then when they were exposed to another high area, they didn't give off the same kind of display. They didn't display the same fear that the older rats did. And the older rats took a lot longer to extinguish the fear. So they couldn't return to normal nearly as quickly as the younger rats. So the extrapolation is that apparently our brains are pretty similar to rat brains. Not sure how I feel about that. But at any rate, there is absolutely truth to the fact that older people's brains don't return to a state of stability nearly as quickly as young brains. And when faced with another situation that's similar to one that invoked the fear response, the older brains tend to hang on to that memory and experience the same fear all over again, whereas the young rats have forgotten it.
Right. I'm going to stick with older but wiser, but that's based on no science at all, and these people took great pains to actually do a scientific study. When you were describing that study, actually, 100% when I was in university, I'd have signed up if it was for cash. I'd have done that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I know I would have. So if we become more fearful as we age, and I know personally we would both say we do,
Yeah.
And the research, it is worth looking at how that might connect to the reasons why some people are somewhat fearful of retirement.
Mm-hmm.
And another way to look at the retirement is a loss. Any loss is going to create some anxiety, clearly, in relationships, those sorts of things. And leaving your job is a loss of some proportion, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I had the opportunity to speak with Morris Tate. He's a retired educator from where we are today in beautiful Northumberland County, just east of Toronto. And Morris did some research about how the stages of grief are closely connected to the stages of retirement. And here's what he had to say. In the Retirement Years podcast, we are discussing the stages of retirement. And we found in looking at different research, there are anywhere from 5 to 7 stages. And they're all, whether they call it one thing or another, they're quite often tend to be quite similar. And one of the words you would never, like you said, when you go into retirement, you get a gift and it's a celebration and it's a something to be proud of your accomplishment. So to have the word grief come into it seems that it wouldn't be possible. But I know in chatting with you and things I've read as well, that there is a bit of a parallel about the feelings or the psychosocial, as you said, those feelings you go through that are similar in going through the grief process and going into the retirement and that life change process. So if you could tell us a bit about what you found out as well.
Yeah, with the grief thing, it's I was laying a lot on this book. It was done a long time ago. Elizabeth Kubler-Ross wrote a book about the 5 stages of grieving, and apparently you can feel this grief even if you're separated from anything, separated from a job, separated from a relationship. They've even I've even seen that separated if you lose a lot of weight. You're losing something. Anytime you psychologically lose something, you're going to go through probably of different levels of intensity, going through a grieving stage of some sort. I know it seems strange, like wonderful. Again, a very high percentage of the people I interviewed said that they really, really enjoyed. There were a few, but most people really, really enjoyed their retirement. Like these 5 stages of the Kubler-Ross one was, the first stage is denial. So how that can come into a newly retiree is that I'm not this old. I can't be an old guy. It's just old guys that retire, and I'm not old. Psychologically, he's saying I'm not old. This isn't right. Of course, the next stage is anger, and this is an interesting one where they become quite angry. They say, "This is the stupidest policy I've ever seen in my life. Why do they have a policy in place saying that I have to retire at 75 years of age?" The anger part can actually be fairly intense, and in the bargaining, when it comes to the bargaining part, they can say, let me go back to work. I'll tell you what to do. I'll come into work. You let me do some contract work, or let me do some consulting work. I'll come back and do it that way. So you try to get back to it that way as a way of sort of satiating their desire to get back into work. And then depression. This one can be fairly serious psychologically too. There's a feeling of helplessness and hopelessness. The next one would be acceptance. So finally, after they go through all that, they finally, after over time, and again, this is another thing too with retirements, there's no one size fits all. Everybody's retirement is completely different. And going through these stages, some of the people ask, how long did it take you to adjust to your retirement? I think one person said, about 30 seconds. And another person asked, how long? There was this gentleman I interviewed in Florida. He'd been retired over a year and a half, and he was bitter. He was back. He was in the angry part. He was in a mess, and it was only because of basically he had a forced retirement. He was downsized, and he had no say over. So been with the company for 40 years, all of a sudden just basically booted out the door. So he was finding it really hard. So you go through all these cycles, and then so finally comes over time. So my point is, for everybody, if they're going to go through these cycles, everybody's different. Everybody goes through them in their own time and goes through it at a different speed. So so finally, though, by whatever way it is, they finally come to the realization and resolve it and accept it. Yes, I'm a retired person. I'm going to make the best of it, and here we go. And that's it.
That was our guest, Morris Tate. We want to thank Morris for sharing facts and conclusions from his research on aging and retirement. If you'd like to contact Morris or find out more about the book by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, visit our website or drop by our Twitter account.
Wow, that's so interesting. And that makes total sense, right? Retirement, like you said, it's a huge change, and it does often involve loss. The loss of workplace friends and colleagues, social gatherings with work friends, a loss of identity based on whatever role you played in your working life, even a loss of purpose, right? Like, wow, that's lots of loss when you stop and think about it.
Yeah, and we've had this conversation off mic where, as educators, if someone asks what you do, you would never say, I do teaching, I do principal. You would say, I am a teacher, or I'm a principal, or whatever it happens to be. It becomes your identity for sure.
Yeah.
And of course, sometimes there's a loss of health as well when you stop working. Like if you're sitting around all day scrolling through Facebook or Twitter or Instagram or snacking on whatever's at hand, that sort of daily routine that some people might fall into.
Whoa. Let's not get too personal here, right? You're talking about routine again. And we agreed that we would leave the discussion on the importance of routine for a future episode, remember?
I do remember because I listened to the last episode just before we started recording this episode, and you are correct. I need to shelf that. But seriously, there are studies that have shown that a fear of loss of health is a significant concern for older adults as they approach retirement. There was an article in the Washington Post, and again, quite recent, 2020, and a U.S. study of nearly 3,000 healthy retirees stepping away from their jobs on average at about age 65 found that the longer people worked, the lower their mortality risk. So that study did make that link. But there's a different U.S. study of more than 6,000 people, 50 and older, and found strong evidence that retirement improves reported health, mental health, and life satisfaction. And further, there were studies in the Netherlands and Japan that also noted the positive effects of retirement on health. And then, of course, just when you're saying, well, one study says that perhaps if you don't retire, you'll stay healthier. One says, or actually there were three that came up with retiring is better health. In 2020, later in the year, a group of experts from the Epidemial Community Health looked at 25 studies and concluded that the effects of retirement on health are mixed, sometimes positive, sometimes negative, depending on a variety of factors. And I think intuitively we would say that. There are some that losing that routine may have a negative effect. For others, getting out of that stressful situation will improve their health. So there is no hard and fast about whether retirement's good or bad. I think, and again, it's just me thinking this, but I would think for the majority, retirement would be a boost to your health because you could focus on yourself, I hope.
Yeah. No, that makes sense. I bet there's also lots of people who are afraid of how much healthcare is going to cost them as they age, right? So they might delay retirement because they're concerned that they need more money in case they need to set aside more money for healthcare. Like, did that come up in your research?
It did. A different research by seniorliving.org, one that you could just go to their website and find this as well. They did an online survey of over 2,000 American adults nearing retirement about the situations they fear the most. And it wasn't zombies or bats. It was much more on point. Nearly 1 in 2 older adults' biggest financial fear was not having enough money saved for retirement.
Sure.
That was number one.
Yeah.
1 in 4 were worried about paying off their debts if they had debt.
Okay.
But then, to your point, 45% of people between 55 and 64 fear having high medical bills, while 39% of those over 65, including many on Medicare, having the same fear. So sort of not having that trust in that system being there. And,
right.
and of course, if you're listening outside of Canada, Canada has a very, what I've, in my personal experience in reaching the age that I have, a very comprehensive health coverage that's universal. And if you do, heaven forbid, have something serious, cancer or whatever, that doesn't mean financial ruin.
No.
Here, but for many other situations, that's not the case.
No, it's true.
It is a very big fear.
Yeah. Yeah.
So when I was doing the retirement workshops for the elementary teachers of Ontario, often what would come up is, what am I going to do, because they've been working for a school board with a health and dental plan, and now they're going to be cut loose. And so they were going to be facing paying for it themselves. And there was real fear about what those premiums would look like and how it would impact their net income in the end. So that did come up every workshop for sure.
Yeah, no, I'm not surprised. The other thing that I found in the research that I did was that the high rate of inflation that, the entire globe is experiencing, from what I understand, the concerns about the increased costs of day-to-day living are shared by adults in all age groups. So the Healthcare of Ontario Pension Plan commissioned a data research company to do a survey in April of 2022. And the company surveyed 1,716 Canadians aged 18 to 65 plus. And across all the age categories, the number one concern was the cost of living in my day-to-day life. So 66% of all the age groups collectively said that this was very concerning. And that compares to 55% a year ago. So that's an increase of 11% in 1 year. That's pretty high.
Right.
Affording the day-to-day for my family was the number one ranked financial priority, and saving for retirement was the number two. 83% of Canadians under 35 said that if inflation continues rising, they'll be forced to push out their retirement date. And 63% of Canadians under 35 were very concerned about housing affordability because it would mean a delay in home ownership, which many of them saw as an investment for retirement. 75% of Canadians across the age groups agreed that there is an emerging retirement crisis and that having a pension is a very effective vehicle to save for retirement, which I thought was interesting. And I certainly know, you and I know how blessed and lucky we are to have an amazing pension, and we recognize that not everybody has that.
Right.
66% of Canadians across the age groups would rather have a lower salary and a pension than a higher salary and no pension. And 77% of Canadians agreed that all employers should be required to contribute in some way towards pensions for all workers. Interesting, eh?
And just before I give you a much happier stat, I'd forgotten that, and you and I both randomly found this headline, that many Americans fear retirement more than death.
Yeah.
And that just stops you. And
right?
Now, as the Stephen King title goes, "If It Bleeds," which is a line that in the media industry that if it creates, that you want to create some buzz. So if that gets people to stop and look, and so this title is a little intentionally
a little alarmist.
Yes. But they did a recent survey by Zeddy, which is you'd looked at this website as well. It's a career website builder, but then it's designed to, they have different business articles and things like that. According to that survey, Zeddy found that 40% of Americans actually fear retirement more than death. Now, I don't know how big that sample size was, but the fact that anybody thinks that is hopefully a good reason for us to continue what we're doing.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, I was on an advisory board that worked closely with the Ontario Teachers Pension Plan, known as OTPP, huge pension plan here in Canada and throughout the world, a very respected pension plan as well. And they release numbers in their annual report each year. And I always grab onto those nuggets that are, wading through all of the graphs and stuff, but just to look at a few things like how's it doing, what's the return, those sorts of things.
Yeah.
But they report, and they have a huge number of educators in the plan. The average age of retirement in Ontario for educators now is 59 years of age. And that's lower than the numbers that we talked about at the beginning. That's Canada-wide.
Yeah.
But more importantly, the average years expected to be on pension is 32 years.
Wow.
And if you sort of frame that as, the first third of your life is figuring out what you're doing, the next third is working, and think about how long that felt,
Yeah.
you got another whole third coming at least.
Yeah.
So, and why I say at least is the OTPP also reports that 146 members are over the age of 100.
Wow.
Yeah, so they've been enjoying their pension much longer than the expected 31 years, and good for them.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, 32 years when you think about that, right? Like
Yep.
you said, that's pretty much as much time as some people spend in their work life.
Right.
Right? Yeah. Well, I think we've probably spent all the time we want to on the fear of retirement, and now we've ended with mentioning mortality rates. So maybe we should promise our listeners that our next episode will be much lighter in topic.
I think they can trust that we can do that. Of course, these are important topics as well, but
Yeah,
it'll
yeah.
also be, we did promise to motivate and not through fear.
Right.
That's not how we do things around here. But
No.
and we've gotten almost to the end, and I know the listeners were like, "Oh my gosh, there hasn't been the joke yet."
Oh,
and
right.
shoot, never fear, just be patient, it's coming. And along the line of the fear of getting older, there's this lady who found the first few strands of gray hair. She thought she'd die.
Oh my God.
Not bad. It it ties in sort of. Yep.
Well, at least we ended on a lighter note. Thanks, Dave. I can always count on you to lighten the mood. So until next time, I'm Mary Ellen.
And I'm Dave. And again, don't forget, send us your questions or retirement topic suggestions. You can reach us through Twitter. You can find us at Retirement Years.
Or by email, the Retirement Years Podcast, all one word, at gmail.com. Thanks for listening. Now go do something that brings you joy. Even more joy than listening to the Retirement Years Podcast. See you next time.
On behalf of your hosts, Mary Ellen French and Dave Wing, thank you for listening to the Retirement Years Podcast. Please follow us on social media and tell a friend.